Welcome to the Selling Show, where we unpack, repack, and break down exactly how top experts sell their ideas, their value, and their services. This is your host, David Newman, and you are in the right place if you want better clients, bigger deals, and higher fees. Yeah, I know. Selling, sales, you don't like it. I'm not even sure why you're listening to this show, but I have the guy that has the cure for all of your ills, Mr. Jeremy Miner. We're going to talk about sales craziness and how to fix it. Welcome to the show.
Well, yeah, possibly. Yeah, possibly we can definitely talk about that. I think the reason why people have a negative view of what selling is because how they've been sold to, right? The old, traditional selling techniques of, assume the sale, grab them by the tie, choke them till they die, are you in or you're out? Like those type of things typically don't work that well, as we all know. But it gives us a negative stigma of what we believe selling really is. And I think a lot of people view selling, they've been it's not their fault, right? So I always say it's not your fault that you've been trained to view selling in this way or to how to sell this way. It's not your fault, but it is your what? It's your problem. Not your fault, but it's your problem, right?
For sure.
If you can't learn how to, effectively sell, you're at a disadvantage compared to those who do. And I think so many sales trainers out there view selling, it's kind of a down thing that goes to people who buy their courses, that they view selling as more adversarial, like you against the prospect, trying to win them over, manipulate them so you can make money. But that's what average salespeople do in our time. That's why they don't make that much money, because that's not what selling is. If you want to be like a top 1% sales professional, or let's say you're a business owner, maybe you're an attorney trying to get on clients, or a CPA trying to get more clients, you have to view selling as more collaborated, right? Like it's collaborating. You're working with the prospect to help them find and solve problems to get where they want to be. And when you start to view selling differently and you use different words and you ask, let's say, more skilled questions that actually trigger them to want to open up, engage, and let their guard down, selling becomes very, very easy and very, very profitable. And the great thing is you get to help people get what they want. That's what selling really is in my mind.
Absolutely right. Well, at the risk of eating dessert first, Jeremy, because you touched on something, lots of value right there, but the thing you touched on is questions. The right questions in the right order with the right come from, which is really to serve and it's not to pitch.
Yeah.
Give us kind of a masterclass in smart questioning from the initial hello all the way kind of throughout the sales process. What are some do's and don'ts of smart questioning for salespeople?
Well, there's a couple of things here, and let's start this way with a better foundation, and then we can get into some individual questions. I think that might help your audience and everything. But I think a lot of people what they want to understand, because my background in college is behavioral science and human psychology. I geek out on, why does the brain make certain decisions? Why do they go left instead of going right? Why do they go up instead of going down? Why do they say yes compared to why do they say no? There's certain mechanics going on in our brain that trigger us to react that way, right? So what we all have to understand is that typically within the first, dare I say 5 seconds, but typically the first 7 to 12 seconds of any conversation you're in. So I don't care if you're selling on the phone, or if you're selling on Zoom, or if you're selling in an office or in a home or on a doorstep, it doesn't matter. Your prospect, we can't even help it as human beings, but subconsciously, we are immediately picking up on your social cues. So, David, it's just like if you're in an event, right, and some stranger comes up to you and starts talking to you, you're immediately assessing, is this person a threat? Are they trying to sell me something? Why did they come up and talk to me? That's what goes on in your mind, right? You can't help it. It's just wired into the reptilian part of our brain, right? It comes from, centuries ago where we were, trying to protect ourselves from saber-toothed tigers. Now we're trying to protect ourselves from pushy salespeople trying to stuff something down our throat. So typically we're picking up on a human being's verbal and nonverbal cues, based on their tonality and what they are saying and asking, that triggers our brain to react that's a scary word in one of two ways. Okay. So if we come across like too excited, you know what I mean? Like the enthusiastic salesperson that says they have the best everything. We come across too excited. If we come across needy, and everybody knows what I mean, but you can tell when you're needy on a sales call, right? And you come across attached and you don't have the right questions asked, you don't know the right tone, it triggers the human brain to go into what's called fight or flight mode. Now, David, everybody's heard of fight or flight mode, but we find that most companies and salespeople don't know that it is a triggered reaction. They think it's just like something that magically happens. It's not like the prospect got up that morning and was like, hey, when a salesperson calls, I'm going to go into fight or flight mode and try to get rid of them. That's not, that doesn't happen. There's certain words we're saying, questions we're asking that triggers that response. And that's where they try to get rid of you. And they're like, oh, we already used somebody for that. Or, we're not interested, or, enough with your questions. Just tell me how much it's going to cost. And I'll tell you if I'm interested. And they try to get rid of you. Okay. Now, once you learn and we'll talk a little bit about today if you want, once you learn what's called NEPQ, and that stands for neuro emotional persuasion questioning, and you learn how to come across more neutral in the conversation, like unbiased, like you're not quite sure you can even help yet. Okay. You come across more calm, you come across more relaxed, and especially this is the key word, detached. And you understand the right questions, you understand the right tone. It triggers the brain to become curious enough where we actually want to engage. The prospect wants to open up to you because they feel like you might have something for them. They don't really know what it is yet, but there's just something different about there. Okay. Ultimately, your agenda is to make the sale or to move this, move it, forward in the process if you're in more of a complex selling environment. But you have to keep that to yourself. Okay. You have to keep that internal, because the moment the prospect feels that you are just there to sell them is the moment they do what? As you know, they start to emotionally shut down. And even the very best questions, they just give you 3 or 4 word answers. And then at the end, they're like, well, it sounds good. Let me get back to you if I'm interested, or let me think it over. Let me pray about it. Let me do more research. I need to look around at other companies. And then nothing ever happens. All right. So we want to trigger engagement. So this might help. I'll kind of go back a little bit. So when I was in college, like I was just saying, my degree that I was studying for was behavioral science and human psychology. Okay. Study the brain, why a human being makes decisions. All right. And if everybody wants to write this down, if you're driving, be careful, but where you got a pen and a handy, write this down. All right. So according to behavioral science, there are 3 forms of persuasion. Okay. And once you understand the differences in persuasion and where you are now, okay, even if you're already doing good, compared to where you could be, completely will change everything for you. Okay. So if I said the words here, I want to do an exercise with you in the audience. If I said the words boiler room selling, what's the first image that comes in your mind, David?
Boiler room selling?
If I said the words boiler room selling, what's the first image that just goes right in your brain?
Guy with his sleeves rolled up, banging the phones, doing 200 calls a day.
Yeah, you picture like some big telemarketing center, or if you've watched some of the movies, Wolf on Wall Street, like, hey, I've got a great opportunity for you, right? That's what you're picturing. So that's really the first era of sales, okay, that we've kind of noted, that boiler room selling. So according to the data, we're the least persuasive. So we're the least persuasive when we tell people things, okay, or we attempt to dominate them or posture them or manipulate them into doing something we want them to do. Okay. Like we push, we assume. And just like if you tell your spouse or your teenage kids that they really, really need to do something for you, and then you keep pushing them, what do they typically do back? They push back.
They resist. Yeah.
They resist. It's human behavior 101. I'm so surprised salespeople haven't caught on it. When we push, people push back. It's just the way human behavior works. So here, I'll give you a few examples of the least persuasive way to sell. Presenting. Okay. We've all been taught you have to have an amazing presentation. You got to show them the slide decks, the 60 to 90 minutes. Here's our corporate office. Here's pictures of our founders. Here's all of the customer service awards we won. We have the best this. We have the best that, which, by the way, like, if you've talked to a lot of salespeople, how many salespeople say they have the best product or service in the market?
About 99.6%.
Yeah, maybe even a little bit higher, right? So pretty much everybody says that. There's no salesperson that comes up to you and says, David, we're the 5th best in the market. Nobody says that. We all say we're the best. So your prospects, just so we understand, psychologically actually trust you less when you say things like that, or especially if you talk down about your competitors. And why? Because they're used to every salesperson that sold them anything from a vacuum cleaner to a car to a home to, cybersecurity for their company saying that they're the best. All right. So according to the data, the average salesperson pretty much in every industry presents about 50% of the time. Okay. We need to hone that down to about 10% and really feed back really the problems that prospect told us they have and how our solution individually solves each one of those problems. Really nothing more, nothing less, all right? Telling your story. Hey, to tell you this, nobody cares about your story when you're selling one-to-one. Whose story do they primarily care about?
Their own.
Their own. Imagine that. I can't believe that, right? How about giving a sales pitch, right? You were talking about that. We've all been taught you have to have a great pitch. You watch CNBC like Shark Tank? You ever watch that show?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, pay attention. Everybody pay attention. If you watch that show, to the sharks' body language, like Damon John and Mr. Wonderful and Barbara and all them, when the entrepreneurs come out, they're really excited and they start pitching. Pay attention to how the shark's body language changes. Okay, so we even have shirts for our clients now that say #ditch the pitch. All right, so we're going to be careful with that. Assuming the sale. Okay, according to the data, very low on the persuasion poll. And that's where, I believe really the term sales is a numbers game comes from, because as a salesperson, we're taught it's more about the quantity of calls you're putting in rather than the quality of each conversation and how skilled that conversation is, all right? And putting sales pressure on them, right? There's a massive difference in applying external sales pressure, pushing somebody into trying to get them to do something you want, compared to questioning skills that allow them to feel so much internal tension that they feel like they have to change, like they have to get out of this problem, these newfound problems that your questionings have allowed them to happen, all right? Now, that's the first mode. So the second mode of selling is more known as consultative selling. Everybody's kind of heard that, right? Came out in the 80s, Sandler Institute, books like Spin Selling, Neil Rackham, college professor, never sold anything, by the way, but taught that you needed to ask logical-based questions to find out the needs of the client, right? Which in the 80s, that was like revolutionary compared to boiler room selling, right? But the problem with that, like what's a potential downfall when you only ask logical-based questions? We call those surface level questions. So when you ask logical-based questions, your prospects give you what type of answers in return?
Logical, yeah.
Right? And as you know, do human beings make buying decisions on logic or emotion?
Not logical.
100% of the time. Brain studies prove that. There's really no debate in behavioral science at that point. So when you ask questions like, can you tell me 2 things that are keeping you awake at night, John? Or, what 2 problems do you have the most? Or who besides you would be involved in this decision, early in a conversation? We might want to relanguage that to say, Jane, can you walk me through your company's decision-making process when it comes to solving problems like this? Is better than who besides you would be involved in this decision. So just relanguaging the questions and getting them to open up triggers more engagement in that conversation, all right? Or asking them at the very beginning of a conversation, what sort of budget do you have set aside? Well, how would they know what type of budget they have set aside when in the beginning of that conversation, they don't even really know what their real problems are, or how bad the problem really is, or the consequences of what happens if they don't do anything about solving the problem. So when you're asking those surface level questions, you're doing yourself a really huge disadvantage, because you kind of have to play the numbers game, because very little emotion is brought out by simply asking logical based questions. Now, kind of on a run-on sentence here, the third mode, this is where it gets interesting. The most persuasive way to sell, according to behavioral science, is through what we call dialogue, okay? So we're the most persuasive when we allow a human being to persuade themselves. That's called dialogue. When we ask, here's the magic word, what are called neuro-emotional persuasion questions. So the question is, how do you get somebody to persuade themselves? That's like the $1 trillion question of our time, right? Because you can't just say hey, David, go ahead and persuade yourself. And by the way, here's our wiring directions, right? That doesn't work. So you have to learn very specific skilled questions and when and really how to ask the question. Like what tone? Is it more of a curious tone for certain questions? Is it more of a skeptical tone, challenging tone for certain questions? Or is it more of a tone that shows more empathy or more concern? So once we learn what type of tone comes across for each question, it triggers them to open up and want to engage. All right. So that's kind of the difference between like error 1, error 2. So we're learning specific sales questions in that structure that gets the prospect to pull you in rather than you trying to push them forward. And that makes selling much easier for sure.
Do you love selling? I know, me too. Do you hate selling? I know, me too. Listen, fantastic sales book you got to get your hands on. How do I know? It's mine. That's how. Do It Selling is now available for sale. Grab your copy, grab all the bonuses, all the companion tools, all the training, all the videos that go with it at doitselling.com. See you over there. You know, Jeremy, this is so brilliant, and I want to short circuit a thought that may be in some of our listeners' heads. Yeah. Because you just went through, and I completely agree with everything you just said. You just went through a little bit of an acting exercise, right? Should I come from a place of curiosity or empathy or a little bit more tough, a little bit more challenging? So for the folks listening, if you think, well, wait a second, Jeremy, you're saying I should be manipulative. I should be play acting. I should be almost lying to these people about my emotional tone. I would completely disagree with that. And what I heard you describe, Jeremy, you are being intentionally human.
Well, I'm being a human being.
Intentionally human being, right?
Showing concern with a certain question is not manipulating. It's actually legitimately showing your concern, because here's what we all have to understand. Your prospects have problems. Your solution solves those. There's never been a product or service that does not solve a problem and or an emotional need. Even if you sell $500,000 Lamborghinis, you're not necessarily solving a problem of getting point A to point B, because they could drive a used Honda for that, but you're solving an emotional need for that prospect. Okay. So there's no service or product that's ever been on the market that doesn't do one of those things, if not both. So they're coming to you, or you're reaching out to them. They have that issue. Your solution solves those. If we don't learn how to communicate with our prospects, it's not that we're just not making money. It's the prospect stays in the status quo. Their problems stay the same, and nothing ever changes for them. And whose responsibility is that? Well, that's our responsibility. So as a salesperson or a business owner, that's why we're in business or in sales, to help prospects find and solve problems to get where they want to go. Is that why you started your own business, was to help them find and solve their problems? So you can't really solve a prospect's problems until they do what? Purchase them.
Yeah.
You can't be, all these books behind me say you have to be really good at problem solving, and that makes sense. But really, if you really think about problem solving, that only happens once they purchase from you and you solve their problem.
Right.
So if you want to get to that point where you can solve their problems, you have to be much better at what we call problem finding. Okay. And that's asking the right questions at the right time with the tone that helps the prospect find problems they didn't even think they had. And I think all of us can agree, when you first start talking to most of your prospects, okay, there's the laydowns here and there, but those are far and few between, especially when the economy contracts. Way less laydowns. But most of your prospects don't even realize they have a problem. Okay. Or maybe they know they have a problem, but they don't know how bad it is. Or maybe they don't understand the consequences of what happens if they don't do anything about solving it. Now, once you learn an EPQ, learn advanced questioning and getting the prospect to open up, not only can you help your prospect find one problem, but you're going to learn skills to help them find 2 or 3 or maybe 4 other problems they didn't realize they had. And when you're able to help your prospect find 2, 3, 4 problems they didn't realize they had, how the heck do you think they view you? They view you as like the expert, the trusted authority, whereas all these other salespeople that call about the same thing that don't know that, they just view them as just another salesperson trying to push their solution down their throat. So once you get your prospects to view you in that manner, you're going to find that they start chasing you down, like thanking you to allow them to send you money to get them where they want to go. And that's a good thing. That's really why you're in sales and business in the first place.
Absolutely. Well, I'd love to talk to you about this, because I know you have some very definitive ideas about kind of the double whammy that we're coming into the current sales landscape with. One is COVID, right? Post-pandemic, early pandemic, post-pandemic.
It's been like 3 years now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But how that has changed. And now with economic uncertainty, recession, depression, inflation, whatever bad words end in the word shun, those are happening now. So give us a little bit of a snapshot of the psychology of buyers and how sellers need to accommodate both of those obstacles.
Yeah, because here's the thing. Anytime there's an economic control, because it's easy to sell, during economic expansion, right? Where customers are more open, they've got more money flowing. They're not really necessarily worried about risk. Now, when COVID originally happened, that first 2-3 months, yes, a little bit harder then because they weren't thinking about like, what's next year look like, or 2 years or 3 years. They were thinking like, how do I get by to next month? So they were really like risk averse where they're just holding on to their money. That doesn't say you shouldn't be making sales, right? If you have the right skills, you can make sales at any time. But anytime there's any economic contraction, okay, your shortcomings in your sales process will only be magnified times 10. And it will be way harder for you to sell because those laydowns that you get now, they're going to shrink about 80 to 90% over the next 12 months. I can pretty much assure you that it's already starting to happen. If you're around in like 2008, 2009, 2010, it's not like the recession just happened in November of 2008 and it was like 3 months. It really didn't start until like halfway through 2009 and it was 2010, right? I mean, that's when really like it kind of bottomed out. It might have started the end of 2008, but it was more the second half of 2009, especially 2010, that it just kind of bottomed out, even 2011. Right. So you got to realize when these things happen, it's not like, it's just over in 2 months and then we're all good. Right. It's just a little bit different. So you have to get much better at questioning skills. You have to get much better at what we call disarming a prospect. So everybody on here has probably heard of like the ABCs of closing, right? Always be closing. You got to close, 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 close. But how can I communicate to everyone on here that mantra of always be closing is actually costing you sales that you could be making, okay, without anybody getting offended at me? Because I like the old shows, Glengarry Glen Ross, but, it's not 1983. We're here in 2023 right now. How do we disarm a prospect? So we want to follow the ABDs of selling. Always be disarming, okay? So from the very first words out of your mouth, okay, to the middle part of that sales process, to the conclusion when the transaction's been done, we're looking for the right things to say, the right questions, the right wording that triggers the prospect to let their guard down rather than bringing their guard up. Okay, so I'll give you maybe a few examples if you want a few examples, if that helps you. So give me an example of an industry that might listen to this just randomly.
Cybersecurity consulting.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we train a lot of people in that industry. So let's say that you're on like a Zoom with, you're probably talking to some like C-level executive before you kind of move up the chain of command. But let's say you're on Zoom with them rather than going on there and be like, here's one technique. So let's say you're on Zoom. What's one of the first questions that 99.9% of salespeople always ask somebody that gets on Zoom or in person or even on the phone? How are you doing today? How's your day going? That is literally the first question that every salesperson that's ever sold anything to anyone asks. Now, I want you to come across from the buyer's point of view when you sound like every other salesperson they've ever encountered. When you say, how are you doing today? First of all, most of your prospects, I know everybody thinks that's a nice thing to say and it's really cordial, but to most prospects, they don't believe you really care about how their damn day's going. They don't believe you want to sit there for 15 minutes and listen to them talk about their day. So to the prospect's mind, you might as well be saying, hey, I'm just asking you this question to try to get you to like me so you buy from me today. That's what most people think. So you don't want to ask questions like that because people just associate you with all these other salespeople that they meet every day that ask them the same damn question. All right. So that's one thing. So instead, get on there and you want to start getting them in like results-based thinking pretty quick, even with your first words out of your mouth rather than cost or price-based thinking. So you get on there, let's say you're getting on Zoom, like, hey, David, how's it going? Can you see me? Can you hear me? Okay, good. And then you look down at your notes, and I'm telling you, like C-level executives especially appreciate that. And you're like, okay, so it looks like you booked on the calendar about looking at possible outside help so that you guys could, and then you repeat back typically what they're looking for. Now, for cybersecurity, maybe they're looking for what? Better ways to protect their, clients from fraud, right? I mean, It just depends on maybe you're selling to a bank or something. You're selling to Wells Fargo. Okay, so it looks like you guys booked on the calendar about looking at possible outside help in protecting your customers from the fraud going on, right? Or whatever. We probably relayed a little bit. I have to look at some of the scripts you do for your industry. And they're like, yeah, right. And then you go into what's called a status frame. Okay, so every conversation you're in, you have to come into that conversation where the prospect feels that you're at least as the same status as them. Okay. I don't mean by coming in and like being a jerk and like being assumptive or anything, but I also don't mean coming in and like apologizing you're late and everything, because that lowers your status. Okay. So when you come in, you've got to come in with that same status. So you avoid questions like, how are you doing today? All that kind of stuff, because that lowers your status. They just view you like a salesperson. So we come in, same status. And as the call goes, from our questionability, it shows that we're an expert from the questions we ask, and our status keeps raising. So by the end of the call, our status is up here where they now view us as like, wow, this person is an expert with what we're talking about. Okay. Yeah. So status frame does that. So you get on there, like after that first initial thing, like, yeah, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, for sure. That's why we booked the call. And they might ask you a question real quick. Okay. So really the first part of this meeting is pretty basic. It's really more for us to find out kind of what you guys are using now to protect the clients that you're bringing in compared to where you're trying to be at. So we can kind of see what the gap looks like to see if we can help. And then, towards the end of the call, if you feel that it might be what you're looking for, we can talk about possible next steps. Would that help you guys? You're never going to have anybody that says, nope, it would not help me to talk about possible next steps. See, because we're neutralizing some of those words at the end. Okay. So here's what I did, especially if they can see, if you're in the office, even if you're on the phone, you still do this little thing because it affects your tone. Yeah. Okay. But especially if they're on Zoom or in the office, they can see you. Notice how I'm already starting to build a gap in their mind by what I just did with my hands. First part of this call is pretty basic. So we downplay it. Okay. As a salesperson in the beginning, you want to kind of downplay it a little bit. You don't want to be like, I'm so excited to be on here. We've got the best solution for you. You're going to be so happy, because that's what every salesperson says. So they put you in this category, right? They just tune you out. So like first part of this call, it's pretty basic. It's really more for us to, find out what you guys are using now for XYZ and kind of the results you're getting from that compared to what result you're trying to be. Now, what did that just do?
One hand goes way up, other hand stays way down, opened up a gap.
This is where they are compared to where they want to be. So I'm already starting to build a gap in their mind visually. This is how you start to do that. Okay. And then towards the end of the call, if you feel that, that it might be what you're looking for. Now, why would I say might be? Why would I not say like at the end of the call, if you feel like you're ready to go, we can show you? Because with a lot of A-type personalities, they're like, well, I didn't say we're ready. Like we're just kind of looking around. And you've immediately triggered resistance. Now you have to compete with that the rest of the call. So as a salesperson, you want to get them to lower their guard down. So when I use neutral words like might be what you're looking for, we can talk about possible next steps. Those are all neutral words. And I'm putting it on their favor. Everybody would say, yeah, that really makes sense. Every single time. That's just an example of how to use human behavior to let their guard down rather than their guard coming up. And then you have to compete at that. Make sense?
Hey, if you're loving this episode as much as I am, pop over to doitmarketing.com/manifesto and get your free 37-page download guide to how to sell smarter, sell more easily, sell more often. That's what we're here to help you with at The Selling Show. Off you go. Well, Jeremy, I can't let you go without talking about the book. The book, my friend. Tell us about the book. What's in the book? What's awesome about the book? This is the new model of selling to an unsellable generation.
So I wrote that with Jerry Acuff. He owns a sales consulting firm, a pretty large one on the East Coast called Delta Point Consulting. He works with about 15 of the top Fortune 100 companies. He's been around for about 25 years as the clients for him, especially in the pharmaceutical space. That's kind of where he comes from. And so Jerry and I wrote that book together. This is, I believe, his fifth or sixth book. All of them had been bestsellers before. But we wrote this book to talk about really, I mean, we just kind of gave an overview, like really how selling has changed, how buying behaviors have changed. Okay. And then what are you going to do about it? Because a lot of books will be like, oh, well, this, and this, and it's all theory. But then you're like walking away like, well, I don't know how to sell more. So we wanted to put like tactical training in it. Like, here's questions to ask at this time for this reason. Okay. And here's the formula. So you plug in what you sell to this formula, right? Because we want the salesperson or the company reading it to like actually have some tangible stuff that they can use. All right. So that's available for pre-order right now. So you can order it online anywhere. And then it'll be in your bookstores near you, like Barnes & Noble and all the major book chains and suppliers, March 15th of 2023. So you can pre-order right now online. And then if you want to walk into Barnes & Noble, it'll be available March 15th, 2023.
Awesome. Really, really great. Jeremy, 2 final questions as we start to land the plane. The final question is, where can we send people to get more Jeremy Miner brilliance? But hold off on that for a minute. If folks were to take one overarching concept from our conversation today about this new way of selling, new mindset around selling, and new skill set around selling, what would you hope that one core takeaway would be?
I think this, and I always ask this, like when I'm doing a virtual event or if I'm doing a keynote for a company or something, if you really think about what sales or selling is in one word, that word is change. Okay. That's all selling is change. It's about how good you are at getting your prospects to view in their mind that by changing their situation, that means purchasing your solution, is far less risky for them than them doing nothing at all, staying in the status quo. Their problems stay the same. Nothing ever changes, which is more risky. So one thing we have to understand is like professionals, whether you own the company or a salesperson, whatever, is that human beings don't like change, even though we say we do. So I want you to think about that for a second. All selling is change. Yet human beings don't like change. And why do we not like change? Well, we don't like it, especially when it's initiated by some pushy salesperson who's ready to pitch their services within seconds of a conversation, right? And repeatedly, human behavior shows that we value something that is more familiar to us, even if we don't like it that much, compared to something that is new or foreign to us. Like if you think about, like the battered spouse syndrome, you have that friend or some relative that keeps going back to somebody that like physically or verbally and mentally abuses them. You always wonder why. You're like, why do they keep going back? Do you know why they keep going back? Because they're afraid of change. They're afraid of the unknown. So as a business owner or a salesperson, we have to know how to get them to view in their mind through our questionability and tone that by changing, that's far less risky than staying the same. So if you think about that, I think that's really one important key.
Awesome. Well, Jeremy Miner, how do people get connected and stay connected to more of your brilliance? What are some resources? What's the link? Where can we invite people to click on right here in the show notes?
I'm not that cool, but thanks for the compliment. So if they want some free resources, we'll give them a few appetizers. We'll give them some hors d'oeuvres first. So they can go to one of our Facebook groups, have them go to salesrevolution.pro. So salesrevolution.pro. Right when they join, why don't you have them check their Facebook Messenger? And we'll have somebody in our team message them over a free training. We'll give them the NEPQ 101 mini course. Okay. It's just a list of like different questions they can use for different situations. We didn't have a lot of time to go into that today. That alone will probably help them sell a little bit more. And then if they want like more, advanced training, like our clients go through, they can just message us in the Facebook group or call customer service in there. And, we can go over different training options we have for their industry if they want to sell more for sure. But just have them start in the Facebook group for sure first.
Okay, awesome. And we'll put the link in the show notes directly under this episode at thesellingshow.com. Jeremy Miner, you're a rock star. I really appreciate all these value bombs. Thank you for being with us today.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate it.
And that wraps up another episode of The Selling Show. Hey, tell you what, if you like us, rate us and review us on Apple Podcasts, subscribe, tell a friend, go grab the notes and downloads and extras at thesellingshow.com. See you next time.